News stories. Focus on Africa.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Who will it be? Zambians have cast their ballots to choose their president in a closely contested election.
I'm Nomsa Masego live in Lusaka, where Zambians voted for their next president.
18 years on from an Al-Qaeda attack on U.S. embassies in East Africa, we hear from George Mimba, who witnessed the tragedy in which hundreds were killed.
All I could see were bodies of people. So these are like your family. The people we just talked to a few minutes ago, seconds ago, are now dead, gone.
Also on this program, the two-wheeled revolution. We find out how the city known as the birthplace of Boko Haram is now home to thousands of bicycles.
And I'm Peter Okwoche live in Rio on day 6 of the Olympics, where Egypt and Tunisia have now joined South Africa on the medals table.
Well, thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. It's been billed as one of the most closely contested elections. Zambians have today been choosing who they want for president. 9 candidates are vying for the position, but the two frontrunners are incumbent President Edgar Lungu and businessman Hakainde Hichilema. Polling has now officially closed. Let's go straight to Lusaka and speak to Focus on Africa's Nomsa Maseko. It seems things have gone smoothly today.
That's correct, Sophie. Zambians from all walks of life, young and old, waited in long, winding queues, some as early as 2 a.m. to cast their ballots. Now, this is an election like no other before because it looks like 5 elections in one because of the number of ballot papers that each voter was given. You would recall that there was violence in the lead up to these elections, which prompted the suspension of campaigning for 10 days last month. But it would appear that today's proceedings went off quite smoothly. Let's take a look at how the day unfolded.
I, Chikompa Dennis, being the presiding officer for Kablonga Boys Polling Station, do hereby declare the polling station officially open.
As the morning light hit the horizon, hundreds of Zambians were already in the queue waiting to cast their votes. This is an election like no other in this country. Each voter is being given 5 ballot papers: presidential, parliamentary, mayoral, local government, and a referendum. All of these to be decided on one day. More than 6 million people are registered to vote, and there are 9 presidential candidates. But this is expected to be a race between just 2 of them, the incumbent President Edgar Lungu and his main rival, Hakainde Hichilema. They both voted in Lusaka. President Lungu cast his ballot in Chawama, while Mr. Hichilema voted at Kabulonga Boys School.
Today is a voting day. We are expecting free, fair, transparent and credible elections. Zambians expect that, nothing short of that. Free, fair, transparent and credible elections.
The stakes are high in this election. The incumbent won by only 1% in the last ballot 18 months ago. And the economy seems to be the overriding issue for voters here, with rising unemployment and the cost of living being amongst their main concerns.
The cost of living, like meal, in schooling, everything's become so high, and I think everything will change if we vote wisely. We hope before they announce the elections, or after they announce the winner, there won't be any violence, we'll be in peace.
It is very important for me, even if I'm old, because I have to preserve my dignity.
As the counting begins tonight, Zambia's Electoral Commission has urged political party supporters to remain calm after final results are announced. Now, most polling stations have already closed here in Zambia, but those voters who were in the queue by 6 o'clock and had not voted will be allowed to vote. And of course, all of those proceedings were closely observed by observer missions. Now, joining me live here on Focus on Africa is Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, former president of Nigeria and the leader of the African Union Observer Mission. What's your take on what happened today?
Thank you. Let me first commend the people of Zambia and the Electoral Commission of Zambia for the peaceful elections. Just before the elections, there were some incidences that got people worried. But what the AU team have observed from the information we got across the country is that the elections have been peaceful. The process have been quite transparent. I personally observed some of the sessions within Lusaka and its environment.
Would you say that these elections have been free, fair and credible?
The elections so far has been peaceful. The processes at the polling units and the streams are very transparent. But you know, issues of election, you cannot conclude until the counting is concluded, until the results are processed. That from what we have seen, we are very hopeful that the elections will be credible. But we cannot conclude until these other processes have been done.
Now, speaking of counting of the ballots, it's already underway. When can Zambians expect the results?
I can't comment on that. It's only the Electoral Commission of Zambia that can say so. Because before you called me to come to this place, I was at one of the polling units, and there were still voters. At 6 o'clock, there were still people on the queue. And of course, those who have entered were allowed to vote. But those who were still to come, I think they closed the gate. So the voting was still on. And I believe in some of the stations, the queues are quite long. And I believe that some of the stations, voting will continue till quite late. So in terms of expecting the results, it's only the Zambian Electoral Commission that can make that prediction. I am not in position to do that.
Is the African Union concerned about the violence that took place in the lead up to the elections? And are there fears of further violence after the results are announced?
Yes, the African Union is here to work with the people of Zambia to ensure free and fair elections, inclusive elections, peaceful elections. And so when we heard about the violence that took place, to the extent that elections campaigns were suspended for about 10 days in Lusaka and the Copper Belt area, we were concerned. And for that, we issued a statement. And of course, we also encouraged others. And when all the observer missions met, we all agreed to issue a common statement that was issued yesterday, pleading that, look, the interests of the nation is more important than any interest of any political party or any candidate. And for the interests of this great Zambia that has been a leading light in terms of democratic processes in Africa, they must maintain peace and tranquility during the electoral process. And what we have observed today, the elections are free and fair and transparent. We are waiting for the processing of the results by the Electoral Commission of Zambia.
Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, thank you for joining us here on Focus on Africa. Sophie, as you heard, voting has now stopped in most polling stations. Counting is now underway with results possibly expected to be announced by the weekend. With that, it's back to you.
All right, Nomsa Maseko, of course, keeping an eye on developments for us there in Lusaka. Well, let's now take a look at other news from Africa. The United Nations has urged Ethiopia to allow international observers into the country following violent protests. The UN Human Rights Chief says there's been no genuine attempt to investigate the violence or find out who was behind it. Dozens of people were killed in protests in Oromia and Amhara regions over the weekend. A Kenyan court has ruled that 4 police officers murdered a leading human rights lawyer, Willy Kimani, along with his client and a taxi driver. The judge said that the 3 were abducted and brutally killed because the client had launched a complaint about being assaulted by a police officer. Police officers deny the charges. Sudanese authorities have warned people living near the banks of the Nile to be careful of floodwaters. More than 70 people have died in flooding across the country in the past 2 weeks. The UN says more than 13,000 houses have been destroyed in recent floods. The International Monetary Fund has reached an initial deal with Egypt for a $12 billion loan. The deal is expected to offer 3 years of funding to support a government reform program and improve the currency market. Egypt's economy has been struggling since the 2011 uprising that overthrew Hosni Mubarak. Now, 18 years ago this week, more than 200 people were killed and thousands were injured in an attack by Al-Qaeda on 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa. It was one of the first major bombings carried out by the group. Kenyan George Mimba was working in the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi when the first bomb went off, and despite his injuries, he returned to the building to try to save others. Now, this is his story, and a warning: there are some distressing images of those injured in the attack.
I cannot describe to you the sound. It went off and I was lifted up, and all the ceiling came down upon me and buried me where I was. Then I started hearing some cries, people crying for help, some shouting, some people crying, some people reeling in pain. It was Friday, I can still remember it very well. It was on Friday morning. The first explosion sounded like a tremor. It was like, and then it turned out that it was a grenade.